Welcome to Perfect-ish, where it's not about having perfect time management, but about perfecting your relationship with time. I'm your host, Callie Brigham, and every week we'll talk all things time and how to maximize it without burnout or guilt. Whether we're chatting with an expert or I'm sharing my 20 years of time management experience, you'll learn simple strategies to make every moment count. Here, it's all about getting close to perfect-ish. So let's synchronize our watches and dive in. Have you ever met someone that maybe 10 to 20 seconds into the conversation, your mouth just drops open a little bit, you lean it a little bit closer, and you just can't get enough of their story? Well, that is exactly how I felt when I met today's guest, Ral West. It was a divine opportunity. We were both in Nashville at an event for brand builders, and we just happened, I say in quotations, to sit next to each other. And I don't believe in any accidents. I believe in divine appointments. As I started to get to know this incredible woman, and I started to realize that her 40 years of entrepreneurial experience was something that I just wanted to soak in. And then I wanted to pass on. That we knew in that moment that there was a special connection, and I wanted to share her with all of you. You're going to hear how she has built and scaled and even sold businesses. But what drew me to her story wasn't just her success. It was what she has done now with that success, helping other entrepreneurs learn how to be the owner instead of just the operator of their business. Because you'll hear from Ral's story that building a business is great, but building a life, that's the dream. And she is living proof of all of that. So grab your coffee, grab something to sip on. Let's enjoy and get ready for this conversation of this incredible woman that I'm so honored to have here today, Ral West. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Callie. That was a delightful introduction. I appreciate it.
Well, it's all true. And I'm sure if you could remember that day, just my eyes wide, and I said, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more.
I probably was not aware of how captivating I was.
Well, sometimes we need to hear our songs sung back to us, don't we? So That's what I want to do for you today. One of the things that struck me, and I think this is a great place to begin, is that our listeners, I'm sure, are all over the spectrum of where they are in their professional career. But for many of them, they might either feel like they are at the beginning, or they are at the beginning, or they're starting something new. Can we go back to where it all started with your first business, what those early days were about? Because if someone were to Google you now and see all your success, sometimes that's hard to live up to. So take us back. Let's go back there.
Okay. Well, we're going back to the early 1980s, which seems like the Stone Ages, so long ago.
You know, my kids like to joke that I was born in the 1900s, right? So we're going to go back to the 1900s.
I know it's before cell phones.
Yes.
Can you believe it? But we did have phones. So that was one thing. Early 1980s, I moved to Anchorage, Alaska. I was born and raised in Seattle, but I made it to Alaska, and that's another story. But I opened up a little business, started off just in my condo, and I was offering marketing consulting to tourism businesses because I grew up in an Alaska tourism business. It was a family business. And so I thought, okay, I know this really well. And there's a lot of small businesses that could use help with their marketing and how to get the word out to their clients. So I did that. And I moved out of my condo into a small office, like in an executive suite. And across the hall from me was this guy. And he kept picking my brain about the travel industry because he saw me flying off to Hawaii on business trips, because some of my early clients were Hawaii travel companies who were selling to Alaskans. And he's like, I want a free trip to Hawaii. I got to figure this out, So it was a very clever guy. And he started promoting condos that were owned by Alaskans. And he would rent the condos to, visitors who wanted to go to Hawaii and get a commission. And from my tourism background, I said, well, yeah, that's fine. But, don't you want to put a package together, like, a rental car and the inner island air? Of course, those were my clients. But anyway, um, and at some point I said, you can't just keep getting all this advice for free. You're going to need to pay me. This is what I do for a living. And so he said, okay, I'll take you out to dinner. And
Wait a
okay.
minute.
Yeah.
He
So
is clever.
I'm like, anywhere? And then he said, in Anchorage. I'm like, damn, I was thinking Paris. But, so I picked the most expensive restaurant in Anchorage. And we had dinner. And about 7 or 8 months later, we got married. So that's the beginning of that. But so I kept running my little business, and his little, condo vacation package business grew, and I kept advising him. And after a few years, it got to the point where I needed to pay more attention to his business, well, which by that time, of course, was our business. And that was because we started chartering jets. And I'm not talking like little business jets. I'm talking about like 150 passenger, 300 passenger, big jets. And we started carrying massive numbers of passengers between Alaska and Hawaii. So we were not only packaging what they did in Hawaii, we were getting them there. And so this company just grew and grew and grew. And we were mom and pop, so we had our hands in everything. And the decision making was all ours, and guiding our team and everything was all ours. And it wasn't long before we were just so overwhelmed. And it's like, we can't keep up. I remember when we had our little baby daughter, I had to bring her to the office and nurse her at my desk while I was having a meeting with my team. It's like, okay, this is the epitome of multitasking. And, sleep was one of those rare commodities. And the lifestyle became untenable. We didn't take care of ourselves. We were eating junk food. Dinners were often fast food at the office. And as our daughter got older and she was in school, she'd come to the office after school, and, she'd do homework or watch videos or whatever while we kept working. And then we'd say, okay, here's McDonald's, here's pizza, Chinese food, whatever we could, do takeout and eat at the office. And I'm like, oh God, this is not healthy. We have to stop doing this. And so we acknowledged that and said, all right, we have to figure this out. What are we going to do? So, I started, we already had a mentor in Robert Kiyosaki, and we would ask him, and he said, get this book called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. And we read that book, we devoured it cover to cover. And we went, okay, all right, we need to do this. These ideas are what we need. And Robert Kiyosaki recommended another book called The Great Game of Business by Jack Stack. And it touted open book management. So we said, oh, that's a great idea. Let's do that. And I went back to college and got a degree in organizational management. I learned about total quality management and, corporate culture and all of this stuff. And everything I learned, I applied. In fact, my staff would just roll their eyes when I'd come to the office in the morning. I'd been at class the night before, and I'd go, guess what I learned? And this is what we're going to do now. And they're just like, oh, no, please don't give us one more thing to do. But, it was a process. It took a long time to learn all this stuff and get it all implemented. And, it wasn't a straight shot from A to B. We made mistakes, and we had learning experiences. So we made lots of corrections, and it took about 5 years. And at the end of those 5 years, we had worked ourselves out of the job of running the company. And we got a COO and a CFO to run the company for us. And then we bought our second home on Maui and bought a yacht and started really enjoying life. That's when we really started living the dream.
You did live the dream, and there's so many little nuggets in here, Ral. And I'm going to put a pin in this because I do want us to talk about the sale to Alaska Airlines. That's a huge
Okay.
thing. That's a feather in the cap. We're going to come back to that though.
Yeah, I didn't
Because
mention that. Mhm.
Yeah, and I'm gonna mention that for you. I'm gonna make sure that we get that in there because that was one of the things that was was understated in your story. However, there's a lot of respect and honor in what you and your husband built. There's so many different pieces though that I hope that if you're listening that you're catching here. And I think some of it is that, Ral, you didn't know how to evolve and how to grow unless you were really faced with the obstacle. I think
Yeah.
so many people are afraid that, oh no, growth is gonna be too scary, or I'm not sure what I'm gonna do. And you know what? Part of it is just not doing it right. And part of it is learning from your mistakes. And part of it is that that first time, it may not work out well, or you might make a hiring mistake, or you might so
Mhm.
I think that that's important to address, don't you? That
Oh,
even though you read the books, you went to school, you also had to have real world experience and not to be afraid of making those mistakes. Wouldn't you
right.
say?
Absolutely. And when people often ask me what's the best advice to give to a young entrepreneur, and it's exactly that. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Because I was. Back in my 20s, I was petrified. And, every time I made a mistake, I would just beat myself up and agonize over it and just like, oh, this is terrible. I'm a piece of, what. And I gradually learned like, oh, these mistakes are learning opportunities and I need to grasp them and embrace them and get all the learning out of them that I can. These are, and I remember Robert Kiyosaki saying that, these every mistake is a learning opportunity. That those might not have been his exact words, but anyway, um, it's growth, and you can't grow unless you're taking action, really. And so the best advice too, another good nugget of advice is just take action. Just do it. Just jump in and try it out. I mean, a lot of the things that we did, we had never done before. We didn't know what we were doing. You just jump in and you start flailing about, and some things work and some things don't. And you just gotta stick with what works and drop what doesn't. And that's the key.
It is. I heard someone say that failure is the teacher, right?
Mm.
That you either win or you learn, either one of those. Just this morning, Ral, I was having a conversation with a girlfriend that just completed a really big virtual conference. It was her first time. And she was telling me all the things that she's going to do differently next time, right? Okay, I learned this is what I need to do for the VIPs. I learned this is how many people I learned. And we laughed and we said, man, isn't it stink that you have to have the first iteration of it and it's just not going to go the way you want, but you can't better it unless you have, like you said, taken action. You just have to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Just jump in. Yep.
Just jump in. So I do want to have everyone know about the big move and the big sale that you had. I loved hearing this part of the story. So tell us how the idea that was born in a condo in Alaska turned out to be a sale to Alaska Airlines. Tell us how that happened.
Okay. Well, it was after we had handed over the management to our COO and CFO, and we were enjoying our lives. But we were also keeping an eye on the business. We had set up all of the metrics. We had reports daily, weekly, monthly. We knew exactly what was going on, and we had meetings with our team. And we were also watching the horizon as to what was happening around us. And we could tell that Alaska Airlines was gearing up to enter the Hawaii market, because before that they had only been on the West Coast, based in Seattle and serving up and down the West Coast. And then they'd expanded to all the way across to New York and so forth. And we knew that their growth pattern would take them to Hawaii. And we knew that it would start on the West Coast, and that then they would eventually figure out that Anchorage was also a good route for them. Anchorage to Hawaii. It's 5.5 hours from Anchorage to Honolulu, same as from Seattle to Honolulu or San Francisco or LA. So we realized that even though we had competed against Hawaiian Airlines and Northwest Airlines and won, that competing against Alaska Airlines would be different. And it didn't take a genius to figure out that their pockets were deeper than ours. So, we started on a shoestring, just nothing. And we were tremendously successful. We had grown the business to 8 digits in annual revenue. So that was wonderful. But, if they competed with us, we would have to slash our fares. They would slash their fares. It would be this, all out fare war, and nobody would win. We'd all end up losing money on every flight. And we were paying for these charters as a set price for the whole plane. And if we didn't make enough to pay for that charter, it came out of our pockets. So that was, a big deal for us. And so we decided that we should put together a package and make a presentation to Alaska Airlines. And we hired an investment banking firm to do that for us. And we looked at other buyers also, but Alaska Airlines just seemed to be the most logical one. So it took like 2 years to negotiate the deal with them, to get them interested enough to even come to the negotiating table. And that was a win. And then it was a long time of figuring out how it would happen and what the price would be and so on and so forth. So in January of 2008 was when we closed the deal, and Alaska Airlines purchased our business.
Impressive. And as you were talking, I was thinking, what is it like for you to fly now? Are you able to completely disengage from the industry when you fly, or are you noticing all the little things on different airlines? And what's that experience like for you?
I'm always a noticer.
I had a feeling.
I mean, travel is my middle name. I love traveling. So yes, I'm always noticing. And one of the things that speaking of Alaska Airlines, I got a handwritten note from a flight attendant saying thank you for your loyalty to Alaska Airlines. Congrats on your 100K status, which meant I traveled 100,000 miles in a year, which I've done a few times. And I was blown away by that. One of the principles that I teach is to delight your customers. And I just went, wow, that delighted me, because I had never, in all of my years of traveling and, 100,000 miles a year, I've never gotten a handwritten note. And how special, she made me feel special. So that delighted me. And I just think that's a great thing. But yes, I notice whether it's a hotel, a restaurant, whatever, when I'm traveling, I do pay attention to systems, because I also teach systems, and I pay attention to their customer service and all of that, because, well, I'm a little bit passionate about business. It's like a game that I love to play. And so I'm always taking note. You bet. But it feels really good to be able to sit there and not have any responsibility. I like that.
That's true. You can still observe, like you said, but you don't have to be the one that goes back to the office and implements the change.
Yeah. And because after we sold our business, we started investing in small cruise ships, because I love cruising. And so that was the same thing. We didn't operate the cruise ships, though. We leased them to a cruise line, and they're still operating them, even though we have sold them to that cruise line over the years. But whenever I'm on a cruise, I'm paying attention to how are they doing this and how are they doing that, and what's their system for boarding the vessel and disembarking, and how smooth does it go, and all of it. Yeah.
I just have to ask, have you done the Clifton Strength Finders?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. We're going to have to talk about this off podcast, because
Okay.
I would love to know what your top strengths are. I feel like some of your, the way that you observe and see and filter things are very similar to me. So we're gonna talk about that one-on-one after
That
this
sounds
too.
fun. Yeah.
But I also just want to highlight something that you said that I feel so passionate about. And that is when you said to delight your clients, delight your customers. I've been researching a lot lately into the concept of what that really looks like.
Yeah.
And, especially when it comes to the fact, and we're going to get to this in a minute, but the fact that when you are not in the weeds of your business,
Mhm.
that you are able to do things like that, or you're able to develop a culture like that. And Ral, I think of the Ritz-Carlton. That's what I've been really studying. And
Mhm.
I know you know this, and their mantra of ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen.
Mhm.
And the culture of that flight attendant has just as much value and honor as a 100,000 miler does too. And she is able to express that because she's been given that freedom. So let's veer into what that looks like, because I know, as someone who's been in business for many years and I have entrepreneurial parents, that there's working in the business and working on the business.
Mhm.
And they're two very distinct things. I've been watching a lot of your videos lately, and one of the things that I know you work with people, individuals, women, high level, high capacity CEOs, is that they cannot do the operations day to day in the minutia of it
Yes.
and scale and have balance and all of that. So
Mhm.
you teach them to flip that, to take ownership, not the operation side. Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, I think that the key point here is that when you're in the weeds, you don't see things. You can't. You have to step back and like a bird's eye view or 10,000-foot view, and take a look at what's going on. And we had to learn how to do that, because there was a time when we were in a rapid growth phase where our customer service sucked. It was terrible.
No
I mean,
handwritten notes anywhere, huh?
no. And I must admit that our culture was more geared to profit. It was a young business. And so we were trying to make it. And so we didn't pay as much attention to things like the culture and, how were our customers feeling and so forth. But we did get the message from our customers that, well, for one thing, in the early days, all of our reservations came in over the phone. The internet was not, a thing in terms of like making all of your bookings online. And so we had to have many reservations agents, but even so, the calls would stack up and people would be on hold for half an hour or an hour, or they'd be waiting in our lobby, waiting to talk to an agent. And they didn't like it, they complained. It was not good. And we went, oh, geez, how do we fix this? And so we got really into the measuring, how many calls can we take an hour? How long is each call? What's the dollar volume per call, and so on and so forth. And, just really started focusing on it, put up an electronic reader board in the office so that all the agents could see how many calls were waiting. And so they could, hurry their call along so that they could get to the next one, and so forth. So it was very intentional to work on our systems so that we could provide better service. And then ultimately what we did was recognize that, okay, we need automation. We can't keep doing this, over the phone. Can only go so, you had to be open. You had to have people there to take the calls. And so the idea of having reservations available online 24/7, that was very appealing. But there were no programs that would provide that to us. They didn't exist. There was no program on a box, software in a box type thing. So we had to go hire a software firm to create it for us. They had to write it all. And it took 2 years and well into 6 digits to pay for it all. But once we were able to flip the switch and people were able to go online to take the bookings, oh my God, that was, a total game changer for us. And we were able to hire fewer sales agents. We still took some calls, but by and large, the reservations were just flowing in overnight. It was fabulous. But, there's another rapid growth kind of era. So we had to adjust. The whole entire way we operated the business had to change in order to accommodate that kind of level of speed that automation brought. So, yeah.
So really, I think that one of the things that has to happen, and the switch that has to flip, is sometimes there's an investment of money, right? Sometimes
Mhm.
there's an investment of resources. Sometimes there's an investment of, um, for you, it was education too, learning how to move into a different position in the company.
Mhm.
Um, and even if we scale that down to, maybe there's an entrepreneur here who even still works out of her house, like you worked out of your condo.
Mhm.
That could even mean hiring the right housekeeper, hiring the right,
Oh,
if we
absolutely.
bring it down to the minutia,
Yes.
we can't be spending dollar time on penny jobs.
Right.
So guide us through some of what that looks like. Maybe even if there's a client example that you have, or how do we start to make that transition in the real world, in real life?
Well, yeah, and I think, you just need to do the math sometimes. It's like, okay, if my earning potential is X number of dollars an hour, whether it's 100 or 500 or whatever, your business produces, and I can hire somebody else for 20, 30, 40, $50 an hour to do a particular thing, it doesn't make sense to keep doing it myself. So, I mean, I haven't cleaned my own house in I don't know how many years, and I don't like it anyway. So that's a great thing to give away. But hiring a bookkeeper, if you're a small business, I was just talking to one of my mastermind participants recently who's saying, "Oh, I need to do the bookkeeping myself because I'm still growing and I don't have the money to pay a bookkeeper." I went, "Well, how much do you think a bookkeeper would cost? And how many hours a week do you think the bookkeeper would need?" And she's not a trained bookkeeper, so maybe it takes her longer because she doesn't know it as well. And just like, do the math, break it down. And what could you use that time for? Or let's put it another way. If you use that time that you were saving by having a bookkeeper do it, how much more business could you bring in? So what would those hours translate to in terms of increased revenue? And is that not worth spending, 25, 30, $50 an hour, whatever your bookkeeper costs you? And, nowadays you can get bookkeepers that are VAs that can do simple bookkeeping and pay them, $20 an hour. That's a no-brainer, and yes, people have control issues. Okay. You were probably going to ask that, weren't you?
Oh, no one listening ever on here has control issues. Yeah, let's go there.
So yeah, a lot of the people that I work with, the entrepreneurs, are saying, "Well, I don't want to let go of that." I mean, I've had entrepreneurs who own big businesses say, "I sign every check." In fact, my husband used to sign every check. Well, we got away from that, you know. So you have to learn to trust. But in order to provide you with that, trust but verify, is set up some systems so that you've got double checks and guidelines in place so that you feel comfortable with handing over a job. So you're gonna get a report, you're gonna get metrics, and you're gonna look at those to see is it done right, is it correct. A financial statement should be delivered to you at least once a month, and it needs to be delivered to you no later than the 20th of the following month. And then you can tell if you understand your business. You can look at your numbers and know if this is right or not. And you have to have that. So you have to establish this system of collecting your data and then looking at your data in a timely fashion so that you know what's going on. And when you learn how to delegate appropriately, I always say there's an art to delegating. And the people who say, "Oh, I've tried delegating and it never works out. It just doesn't get done right." And my response is, well, then you're not doing it right. So you have to hand over a task or a project and outline it. Say this is what needs to be done. This is what the end result is. So in other words, paint a picture of what a good job looks like, and then give them a time frame. It needs to be done by X time. But then you're not done delegating. You're not done delegating until the job is completely done to your satisfaction and on time. And what needs to happen in the meantime is that you have to build in some feedback loops. So you have to calendar for yourself a reminder to check back with this person or that team and say, "Give me an update. What's the progress? What's the status? What are you doing? Let me see what you've done so far. I'll give you some hints and corrections if you've gotten off track." And then that's how you guide your team or whoever it is that you've delegated to, so that you can feel comfortable handing that over. You don't have to lose control in order to have other people do it.
I feel this is such a master class, Ral, and that's where my mind was going as well. You're not removing control from these high level capacity people, that the reason that they're even in that position is because they do have done a great job. They have controlled things in to the most part. You're not asking people to lose control. You're
Mm.
just asking them to shift the control. Is that a good way of saying, or you have a
Yeah.
better way of
No, I think
explaining
that
that?
that's a good way to say it. And um, you have to shift your mindset, and you have to start thinking like, a CEO or an owner, and get away from thinking that you have to do it. The other thing is that when you're delegating and spelling out, the processes of a task, get away from feeling like it has to be done exactly the way you would do it all the way along. So Robert Kiyosaki had a fruit bowl theory of business, and he said that the bowl is your container, and it's made out of wood or metal or glass, or whatever your bowl is made out of, and that keeps its shape. It's static. But the fruit inside the bowl is whatever, there's apples, bananas, grapes, peaches, whatever you've got in the bowl. And they can be arranged in that bowl in a number of different ways. It's still a fruit bowl. So allow your people to be the fruit and to put themselves in that bowl in their own way. But in the end, you still have to have that bowl, and they have to stay within the framework of that bowl.
That's a beautiful example. And what I have learned in my experience is that many times they bring to the fruit bowl a better piece of fruit or a unique piece of fruit than I would have if I will just allow them to flourish or work in their strengths, what you and I are going to talk about after this.
Yeah.
So much so that I'm almost stealing the blessing of what somebody else has when I think that only I can do it.
No, you're not stealing, you're leveraging.
Instead of stealing, you're leveraging. So
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
That's another one of my principles, is that you get leverage by having other people's strengths and talents work for you. Like hiring a bookkeeper who knows bookkeeping better than you do. That's leverage. Getting a mentor, getting a coach, joining a mastermind program. That's leverage, because you don't, that's one of the things I learned along the way. When I'm in my 20 somethings, I thought I knew it all. Turned out I didn't. And I still don't. And after 45 years of doing this, I still don't know it all. And there's people who just are far, far better at some things than I am, a lot of things. But I need to use my strengths where other people don't have those strengths. And I need to leverage other people's strengths. And I need to leverage automation, technology, AI, whatever it is. That's smart.
It is smart. I'm thinking back to the very first time that I did what you're telling us to do. I was in my very early 20s. I lived in 800 square feet in a little duplex in Memphis, Tennessee. And I hired someone to come clean my 800 square feet, which it was 2 bedrooms. I only lived in one of them. It was just me and the cat. But every other week. And I think I hired her for, to be there for an hour or two. It probably took her a total of 20 minutes. There was barely anything to do. But I tell you what, Ral, I worked harder in those 2 hours than I probably worked the rest of the week, because I was having someone do something I could do, but I was choosing to leverage that. And I'm telling you what, I wasn't going to sit around well, we weren't scrolling on our phones back then, but I wasn't going to sit around and do that. It actually made me more motivated to do the things I needed to do when I had other people doing other things. It's fun thinking back to
Wow.
what that looked like. It was a little scary, but I tell you what, I've never looked back, and I've never not had someone clean my house ever since then.
Yeah. Oh, it's so freeing. Because another thing is taking care of yourself is a very important piece of this. And too often I see entrepreneurs who were like I was, didn't take care of themselves, put themselves last, didn't get enough sleep, didn't eat right, didn't exercise. That That was me. And, that's just so wrong. We need to take care of ourselves. We need to put self-care on that important list. So even if you're hiring somebody to do something so that you can take that time and go get a massage, great. Because you know what? I've had some of my brilliant thoughts, when I've been in a massage and there's quiet music going. It's like, ooh, I just got a brilliant idea, which wouldn't have happened if I was busy doing something. You've got to give yourself that freedom to let your mind explore and be creative. Creativity does not happen when you've got a lot of things going on, you know?
So true. And I remember reading an article from Ariana Huffington, who had burned the candle at both ends, and the lack of sleep was a badge that she wore. And then she had extreme health issues. She said she almost died from not having enough sleep. And
God,
how does that serve anyone? That doesn't serve her or her family or her dreams. And
yeah.
she has become an evangelist of sleep and self-care ever since. And really what I want you to speak to here as we wrap up our conversation is the whole purpose of working hard and figuring it out and leveraging was, I know, and I can see it on your screen too, was to ultimately lead to living the dream.
Mm.
I want you to speak into that. And I have such an affinity for it. My brother and sister-in-law, that's their phrase from the time they got married. That's what they say. How are you doing? I'm living the dream. What does that mean to you? How does 40 years of learning this and working with people and growing yourself, what is living the dream, Ral?
Oh gosh. It's for me, as I told you before, travel is my middle name. So living the dream means the freedom to travel wherever I want to go and however I want to. I prefer luxury travel, so I'm not into camping. Sorry. But just being able to take off and spend 6 weeks traveling in Europe, like we did last fall. About a year ago, we were in Europe, and we didn't have to worry about all the businesses that we had. We were able to keep in touch with internet and so forth, but we didn't spend a lot of time working on the business, just enough to, look at the emails and so forth. And, having that freedom, being able to, we have a daughter who lives in Australia, and she has 3 children. So our 3 grandchildren are in Australia. So we want to be able to take off and go to Australia when we want to see them. And, back in COVID days, we couldn't do that because Australia wouldn't let us in. Even though we had a daughter there, we weren't considered immediate family. And it wasn't until almost 2 years into COVID that they changed the definition of immediate family to allow parents of a resident to enter. So we were right there. And in the meantime, we had our baby granddaughter was born in November of 2020. She was 14 months old when we first got to meet her and hold her. Oh my God, that freedom to do that, that's living the dream. And, and having the freedom to go to the gym, work out with my trainer, take long walks, take care of myself, eat right. That's living the dream. Spending time with friends, living in homes that we adore. That's all living the dream. And you can define it for yourself however you want. Maybe it's, yoga retreats or whatever, just define it for yourself.
Oh, beautiful. And oh, that broke my heart thinking not being able to see that precious baby for that long. I can only imagine that first little cuddle and snuggle and how good that felt. And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
when we boil down to live in the dream, it's typically not material possessions, although those are nice. It's the experiences, it's the people. That's what I hear you saying. And we want to be the kind of women that we do have purpose and mission in our professional life, but not at the expense of the other.
Right.
And so, Ral, if somebody wants more of you and they say, okay, you're singing my song, you're speaking my language, where do they get more of you? They can, I know, follow you, they can connect with you. Give
Mhm.
us that.
Yes. Well, if you can spell my name, you can find me. And I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. I have a YouTube channel. I have a LinkedIn newsletter. But if you want to reach out to me and talk to me and have me, talk about your business and see where you are and what you might need, just do www.ralwest.com/let's talk and reach out to me so I can get to know you.
That's perfect. Well, you are not only living the dream, Ral, but you're inspiring us and reminding us that we don't have to wait to do that too. We can start today, even if it's in a small way, even if it's the small delegation, even if it's the small decision that we're going to make or the connection or whatever that looks like. Thank you for giving us permission to do that and some of the steps to do that. And then the opportunity to follow you and fall in love with you. It's been an absolute privilege to hear your story.
Oh, thank you, Callie. I've enjoyed it too.
Yes, and it's been a long time coming because I've been traveling, you've been traveling, we've been living the dream, and so we finally are able to connect.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I love it. Well, from Alaska or wherever you are in the world to here in Florida on the Gulf Coast where I am, to everyone listening, Ral, thank you for giving us your wisdom, sharing your story. We look forward to learning and growing with you together, and it's been a privilege today. Thank you, friend.
Oh, thanks very much, Callie.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Until next time, God bless. Thanks for tuning in to the Perfect-ish Time Management Podcast. Let's keep the fun going. Follow me on social and join our Facebook community. And if you're ready for some one-on-one time management coaching to reach the top of your game without burnout or guilt, I'd love to chat. Book a free interest call using the link in the show notes or send me a DM. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review and share it with a friend who's ready to master their time too. Remember, we're in this together, making real progress towards becoming perfect-ish.